Good morning, everyone. Welcome. This is Angela Coulter and
Sarah Sieg, Avagnoni.
bringing you this week's Ascended World Collective Energy Share. So it's interesting because it was funny. Apparently, you were having a very different experience than me yesterday. So it's always, then somehow opposite sides to the same coin at some
Right.
right. Last week we did a whole bunch of discussions about twin flames, which funnily enough, in a funny enough way, set off a whole bunch of stuff about being a catalyst of change, right?
Right.
So, I didn't even connect that before. I didn't even look at that before. It's like, what could that connection have been? Because this came up right after. This came up like the next day, right?
Morning, Yasmin.
Oh, see, now I'm still not seeing stuff. Hold on, I have to pull it over my phone. But I think that would be related because I think that the twin flame thing and the spark that we were talking about last week becomes, maybe that was the first time we made change and it was felt what we believed to be painful.
Right. Or that we had to be
created the fire, right?
Right. And oh gosh, I thought of a perfect word, like the trailblazer.
Yes, to change the dynamic of, I'm just trying to pull this up on my phone here, change the dynamic of where are we?
I found us. We're there. I'm seeing us.
And I'm sorry, I shouldn't. All right, there we go. There we are. The dynamic of having to create some kind of friction to create change, right?
Or to bring it about. Right. Yeah.
Right.
Some price to pay.
Some price to pay, yes. And so, it
Right.
started talking about the whole twin spark thing, the twin flame thing. Then there was all of this stuff and friction around both of us last week of, like he said, she said, you did this, you didn't do this, and then like having to suffer for being, a catalyst for somebody else's change, or the belief that we have to be a catalyst at all.
Right. Or that the catalyst has to pay a price, suffer. There has to be a consequence.
Well, or even that we're only motivated through a catalyst. How about that
Right.
one? Because that's a big pervasive one.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
I was, this something that I seem to be bringing up a lot in
Good
the
morning,
past.
Laurel.
Morning. And I think something that I've been bringing up in the past week a lot has been, why do you have to wait for yourself to get, the fire under your butt? Like, why do you have to wait for a fight? Why do you have to wait for, something, some debilitating thing, like whether you lose a job or you get divorced or you hurt yourself or you get sick? Like, why is it that we so often wait for a catalyst to push us into change instead of simply being change? Right. And then, the next step was really getting to that being the catalyst, and being the catalyst of change and having punishment for that, because then you sort of, get the blame, so to speak.
Right.
Or, you get the trigger because you are the catalyst, right? You're the, right? Because
it's your fault. You have to take responsibility for this.
Yeah. So that was where we even got to even Jesus, right? Because that was the big, and it was almost like the whole discussions that I had with Yeshua early on, which is like, yeah, we're doing it different this time, but now this is it. This is the thing. And it was like when we hit that catalyzing change and just simply changing, like I loved your vision of like the ocean.
Right.
And it was like simply, instead of like putting a drop in the ocean to watch it ripple, it was just putting the drop in the ocean and it just changed the entire ocean like that.
Right. Oh, and I still find that so powerful.
It is.
To feel into that.
It is. So
and it changes it from work or effort to it just is.
Yes. Yep. So, you know, and the challenge is we still are remembering how to just be versus having to do and
Right.
to do anything to create change, right? Instead of just being the change. And it's so funny, the whole being the change. People know that term, right?
Right.
Be the change you want to see in the world, right?
Exactly.
But but we say that and then we still do.
Right.
Which I think is hysterical. And you're like, you think about it. And the mind says, well, how do I do that?
Right.
Right?
How do I
how,
do
do,
be?
how do I do being? And
Right.
it's really this, it's so funny. It's like, well, and we've talked about this before, but this is really important because when we started talking about it last week, it was like, oh, this just opens up this whole thing because that's what the collective, as we're waiting for as a collective, as well as individuals, is is to simply do the shift, right?
Right.
And not have to, I'm sorry, to simply be the shift and not have to do anything because all the stuff that we do just falls away when we're
Right.
being that, right?
Right. Well, and that's where we run into the consequences or the price to pay or the resistance from
Mm-hmm.
others.
Yep.
Whereas if you just simply are being the change, they can choose to participate or not. But on some level, just being exposed to that vibration opens a whole new world for them.
Right. Right. And that is a pure fierce, and that goes back to fierce authenticity, right?
Right.
Of
Absolutely.
existing in your truth,
Right.
right? Existing in your being. And I was being aware of that all weekend. And it's funny is that I committed myself to that all weekend, right? I committed
Right.
myself to just being, and actually I had a fabulous weekend of that, of like being in every moment. And there was no like past. And it's funny because I went to see the play Rent, this weekend, which I
Mm-hmm.
love. I love that. I loved it. And I had never seen it on stage. I only had seen the movie. But the whole thing, so the whole story, for anybody who doesn't know, it's like, it's a bunch of bohemians in, Greenwich Village in like 89, 90, going through like, so it's very artistically, you know, be in your authentic self, like express yourself and whatever, regardless of what culture tells you. But then also, like, they had the whole thing of AIDS hanging over, because that was when AIDS was in full swing, like hanging over their
Right.
heads and all that kind of stuff. And so, really, the theme of like much of the whole play is how do you live in just this moment? Because if you only have, say, a year to live, right?
Right.
A lot of them thought a year or less, or a couple months, or it could be a couple of years or whatever. But it's like, why don't, and I thought, what a great thing to be seeing this weekend when I'm in this being place, right? Because
Right.
there's even a song in that play that's all about like there's no tomorrow and there's no yesterday, there's only like right now. And that's the being thing. That's going back to Eckhart Tolle's power of now, right? And
Right.
the true power is in the essence of what is this moment in this
Right.
creation, right? And when we can be that, then there's no need for change because we just create. Of course, we've been talking about this for how long?
Oh, off and on, I'd say for years.
But it's emergent.
Lifetimes.
But now it's emergent. Now it's like, okay,
Right.
either you be the change or you're gonna do the change, and it's not gonna be so happy and
Right.
pleasant.
Right. Right.
And
Right.
what's interesting is at some level, many of us don't believe we're allowed to. We don't believe we are worthy to, right?
Well, and I spent the weekend looking at it from a different perspective, from the perspective of how to be happy. And you think you have to do something.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a journey inward in, looking at, well, society tells me I have to do these things to be happy. or it has to look like this to be happy. And it's more of reacquainting yourself with what being is from that perspective of,
Well, yes. Yeah. And the thing with that too, culturally, is many don't even know what happiness is.
exactly, which
Because,
that's where the journey inward becomes so valuable, because that's where the discovery is.
right.
It's not external.
It's not saying, oh, well, when I get along with this person, it makes me happy. Or, oh, when, I'm able to do this, when I'm able to do this, it makes me happy. Right.
Or think about what we talked about with the twin flame last week. Once I find this person,
Right. I'll be
that
happy.
completes me, and then I can be happy.
Which, as we talked about last week, not quite the case
Right,
most of the
exactly.
time. So,
Exactly.
so yeah. And actually, it's funny because I did the whole weekend was simply flowing through being present. And in that presence, there was such peace and wholeness in every moment. Right. So, like, yeah, I think yesterday was nothing of a phenomenal day. Like, it was just a pretty, it was just a flowing, effortless day, which was, I guess, the perfection of it, right? My
Right.
husband had to go away on a business trip, so I took him to the airport, like about lunchtime, and then I went, did some food shopping, and I came home, and I decided to go for a walk on the Greenway here, and I came home, and I took a bath, and I soaked in the bath, and then I started meditating, and I fell asleep, and then, I did some stuff, and I did, the Trinity call last night, and then I watched a movie, and I went to bed, and it was so just beingness, like, and there was
Right.
no, like, and I did stuff, but it was really not.
The doing stemmed from the being,
Yeah, and it
instead of
was
the being stemming from the doing.
and it was completely fluid. So, it was funny because, I had a whole bunch of, and actually had a great conversation with my husband before he left about that being, because he has, like, and I'm not just pointing this out because it's him. I'm just saying, because this is such a common thing for so many, is because he's actually focusing on how to get to that, how to be in that place now, right?
Right.
Well, we have so many layers of doing embedded on us that it's like, oh, I've got to do this, and I've got to do this, and I've got to, and even that we think I've got to make this point, right? Or
Right.
I've got to have this come across, or I've got to, gotta. And then it's like, okay, if I took this away, then what? That you don't got to
Right.
do anything, right? If I took this
Right.
away, you don't have to do that. If you just took this away, what would you take that energy and put it on instead of talking about it? Right.
Right.
Um, put it, yeah. And it's all these different ways of, it sounds really gushy. The funny thing is, what we got last week is, this is really the top importance right now, is the allowing ourselves to be change. Because if we don't allow ourselves to be change, we will do change, and the do change is not going to be the best, the easiest way.
Right.
Well, we're already doing change, right?
Right.
What's
Right.
going
And how does that feel?
Yeah, for many, not good.
Right.
So, and it sounds really easy, and it is really easy, but that's why the mind hates it.
Right. And that's the point you have to get past, is the
Right.
gates of the mind,
Right.
wanting to control it and manage it, put it in a box,
Yeah.
create boundaries around it.
And it's funny because, to a point that I have, not just one, but multiple people have said to me, is like, oh, well, at some point you're just, you just know you're connected all the time, and you don't ever really have to do any meditation, or you don't have to have any quiet time. And I'm going, no. Yes, you're connected all the time, but the point of meditation is to be. And if you're
Right.
not just being, then you're ignoring the whole purpose of it to begin with, right? Because the
Right.
mind justifies, oh, but I'm connected all the time,
Right.
right? So, I'm consciously getting messages all the time, like, right, except you're not shutting the mind down, like,
And
even
what are you
close to that.
being about those messages? Not what you're
Right,
doing, but what are you being
right.
about those messages?
Because all the doing is still allowing us to ignore the consciousness of the being.
Right.
And more so I found than ever before, it is subtle beyond belief, but it is
Powerful.
it is powerful, right?
Right.
The
And
subtle
you
no,
know when you've crossed that line
yes,
because this shift happens.
yes, yep,
And it's like, oh, now I understand.
yeah, but we don't get there unless we quiet the mind. We don't get there unless it's not just the conscious creation, it is the quieting of the chatter that is so important. And if you're still chattering,
Right. You're
then
still doing.
you're still doing.
Right.
Our most powerful place is in complete presence, in complete being, and free of thought. That is actually our most powerful place
And natural state.
and natural state. Yeah. And like an effortless. Um, it's it's a challenging thing for us to impart because there aren't words to it
Right.
because that's the
Right.
thinking part. But if we do nothing else but be in this pure sense of awareness and consciousness, that is all we need to do. That's all we need to be.
Right.
Um, and it's a challenging thing for the ego to accept because the ego wants to say, I want to be the best. I want to be realized. I want to be this. I want to, like I want to do this. I want to be able to do this and do that. And it's like, well, you don't need to do anything. You just are being that remembrance.
Right.
And we're not being remembrance if we're still chattering.
Mm-hmm.
The more conscious we become, the less we need to chatter.
Whether it's just in our minds or literally.
Right. And now it's funny because we say that, but look around us
At the chatter.
at the chatter.
Right.
There's more chatter now in the spiritual community than there has ever been. It's like, look at me, look at me, look at me, look at me, like listen
Look
to
at how
me.
different I am.
Yes. And it is a challenge when you're guided to be out there as, a beacon of remembrance. But the thing is being a beacon of remembrance is just being a beacon of remembrance. You don't have to do anything. And the mind says, what does
Right.
that look like? Right. What do
Right.
I have to do
How do
to
I
do
do that?
right? And we still have, we were talking about Friday night, we had share and we were
Right.
talking about, I just totally lost that. Oh, how the more I think it was Sandy Anthony who had said, and it's just like the more that she's, gets into that being state, then the less like this place starts feeling real because this is
Right.
the doing place. I mean, and she didn't say it in those words, but I saw it
Right.
as that's right, because this is the doing place, right? That we do
Right.
things here, right?
Right. Right.
So, and I realized that over the weekend that was part of what it is and why it's felt like this is less real than anything else, that it feels more real out there. And because the being becomes more foundational and concrete,
Mm-hmm.
and then the doing just becomes something that's there, right? And
Right.
it's an option versus a necessity, which makes it a completely different energy, right?
Oh, absolutely. Well, and the impact it has on you is indiscernible versus taking the body blows of constantly being in the doing all the time.
Right. Right.
That's letting the wave tumble you versus riding the wave.
Right. Or even riding the wave is doing something. What if you're just the wave? A wave in the ocean doesn't feel like it's any different from the ocean, right? It just is,
Right. Right.
right? So it's really being the wave, not doing the wave at all.
True. Or sitting back and just creating the waves.
Right. Or yeah, so it's just like,
But that's
okay.
still doing.
But it's just not feeling like, because I just don't, it's just that breath. And that's where, excuse me, there's a yawn. That's where the mind just is going a little nuts right now.
Right.
How do I do that? How do I do that?
Right.
I'm supposed to do something, right? I'm supposed to be a leader in this, and that means I have to do something, right? I actually have to do leadership, right? That's what the mind is
Right.
saying.
Right.
Instead of, well, being a beacon is just being a beacon, and you use it or you don't, right? Somebody else uses
Exactly.
it.
Yeah, you don't see lighthouses running after ships saying, "Don't hit these rocks, don't hit these
Right,
rocks."
right, right. Exactly. And we still don't believe consciously, fully, that we are worthwhile or worthy by being a beacon versus doing something. We still feel like doing makes us more important, right?
Right.
And I have to constantly keep myself in check right now, because there's the impulse to, oh, go out there and teach these classes and workshops and this and this and this and this and do this and do this and do this. And yes,
Right.
I am doing some stuff, but it's not what the mind is wanting to do.
Yes, I would agree. I would
It
agree. I have worked to channel the mind into conveying how to be.
Yeah,
And that's what sparked the inner journey.
conveying how to be. Yeah. And what was it, the statement? I'm gonna look at my text from this weekend. The statement that we came up with that was really good.
There is no do in changing. There is no doing in changing or in
There's
change.
there's only being. I think I said it. Yeah, there's no doing to change.
Right.
So if we take out no, because that's a negative, right? There's only being to change.
Right.
I even like that better.
I do too. Yep.
There's only being to change. So because if we do to change, then there's all the stuff that's required to do, right? There's a path, a process, da 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 da, right?
Well, the mind, the ego, the words, and once you bring all that in, it immediately becomes limited.
Mm-hmm. So I think today really is all about whatever it is we need to do so that we can just allow ourselves to be that change, right? To untrain ourselves from the mind and retrain ourselves from the consciousness of remembering that doing is only optional.
Right.
And really
You
the truth.
said what there is to do.
Right. Yeah.
So I wonder if there's a different way to say what there is to be right now.
Yeah. And doing, well, and it's like we've been talking about the doing from being, right?
Right.
So that the doing becomes optional and the being becomes primary and foundational.
Right. And the doing is a result of the being instead
Right.
of the being a result of doing.
Right. Right. And again, the doing just becomes optional, which then takes away the urgency of doing.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
it takes away a lot of the chatter.
Right.
And probably clarity on what that is, because the mind just is just going, wow, what are you talking about?
Right.
We can't do that. How do you do that? So, or, oh, that's very nice. I'll do that on Sunday because that's
Right.
that's
Well,
when I have
I've already
time.
done that.
Or I've done that last Sunday. Right. I did that yesterday. So, because I get the questions and I hear it out there. Like I connect into the collective and it's like, well, then how do I get my house clean? How do I do this? How do I do that? And it's like, when we were talking about that on Friday night, Part of it is this. I have noticed that doing has become so much on the large part, a lot more effortless than it used to be the more that I focus on my being.
Right.
Because like I said, it becomes less real. It becomes less defining. It becomes less, like it has so much less weight. It's just more fluid.
It flowing was the word I was going to use. It
Yeah.
just, you flow, you flow into the doing from that place of being to where you almost don't even notice it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's just sort of like, okay, it's non-consequential. And what's funny is it's like the fluidity of anything, right? As soon as we become fluid to something and we don't fear it, we don't resent
Resist.
it, we don't resist it, we don't like anticipate it, we just allow it to exist. We allow it to be the doing,
Right.
we allow the doing to just be. Then there's such fluidity that it's just part of the whole wave, right? So it's
Right.
not a
It's like water finding gravity. It's just inevitable.
yeah. So it becomes a lot easier actually. And so that's the funny part because the mind goes, well, but we got to do. We got to do this. We got to do that. We got to do this. And oh, you can say that and that sounds nice, but we still have to do this and pay the bills and da 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 da. Right.
And
And
control it.
and control it. Right. And the being is like, and when we be, and when we be,
We be doing.
we be doing, when we be, the doing becomes so much more of a minute piece of the energy because it just automatically seems to get done even when we
Right.
do it even when we do it ourselves from that space. And that's
Yes,
the
I would agree.
that's the whole thing about like when you talk to somebody about meditating and that whole like if you have time, meditate for a half hour, and if you don't, meditate for an hour kind of thing.
Exactly.
And I can't tell you how many people that I've worked with over the years who fought it. I have too many things, blah, blah, blah. But then when I finally would get them to commit to just being that, to just quieting the chatter and focusing on emptying the mind, even if it's 15 minutes a day, it's amazing that they come back to me and they say, wow, it's amazing how much I'm getting done now. Right.
Right.
And
Or
that's
the
a
or the peace that settles in.
right. And then I have so much ease in like going through my day and there's one woman, it was so funny. She fought it and fought it and fought it and fought it. And then she finally, like, I could tell, like, she came back and she was a completely different person. Her energy was different. She was much more centered. And she's like, I am getting to projects that I've had sitting there that I've wanted to do for I don't know how long. And I was like, I didn't think I had time, but now I'm taking more time to actually meditate now and like quiet everything. And she's like, and everything is just flowing together so much more
And getting
easily
done.
and
Right.
getting done.
Yep.
That's what we miss when we don't take that time out to have that quietude, that consciousness,
Right.
that centeredness, that emptiness, which the mind says is a bad thing, but the consciousness says the emptiness is that wholeness. It's the creative void of potential.
Right. Right.
And if we never tap into that because we're so busy doing and carrying out the doing, it just we become weaker and weaker in terms of our consciousness and power, which is contrary to what the mind thinks. So that's a big one. A big one. And it sounds so simple and elementary to say, yeah, well, meditate. And I do it. It's so funny as I love the people who come to me, they're just like, oh yeah, well, I'm just connected all the time. I don't have to meditate. And I'm just like, and yet they're the chattiest, like chattiest people I know. And I'm just like, yeah, but the chattiness is still there. It's still drowning out your consciousness.
Well, and it's almost like you can replace the word meditate with being. Just
Right.
be.
Mm-hmm. Right. Because, getting out in nature, fabulous.
Right.
Um, I love, it's funny is I had this awareness yesterday on the trail of oh like, and I said it was really funny. I was talking to my husband last night and I said, it's really funny is I don't really miss having a dog. at all. We had dogs for years or whatever, and we just have the cats now. I'm like, I do miss my dog on walks because she was just a great companion to have and stuff. I'm like, but at the same time, I have a much different level of consciousness and connection without the dog too.
Right. Less distraction.
Yeah. Because I'm not sitting there going, oh, she doesn't want to sit still. Like if I feel like sitting someplace, I just sit down,
Right.
you know? Um, but she would have loved the trial here. Just saying. I think she was there with me yesterday. That's why she kept on coming to mind. But and it's actually much better now because she's free and not have to be on a leash and she can come and go as she pleases.
Right. And the walking isn't such an effort.
Right. Right. In fact, she's like, why are you taking so long? Why are you going so slow? Yeah. But that's the whole like really being connected and quiet. It was such a really, it's just such a beautiful thing because you hear and you feel so much when you give yourself that space. And it becomes a walking meditation in itself.
Right. Well, the senses wake up,
Yeah. Yeah.
all of them.
Yeah. Yeah. And the longer you do it, the more you start. And the funny thing that I find is that the longer I do it, the more I immerse myself in it. And I don't realize how much of a shift I have gone through in my senses until I go back to doing like in a different, going back to the, you know, much more closed off doing kind of place. So yeah, it's really cool to see just, there are buds on the trees.
Right. Right.
And
The
the
birds sound different.
the birds do sound different. And but the trees aren't like clamoring to hurry up and get the buds out. They're just appearing
Right.
because all the conditions are coming together symphonically that cause that to happen now. And of course, there is no time. So to them, that's really fast. To us, it's
Right.
really slow. And that's where the relativity comes to play. So yeah, there's so much to this. It's so funny. It's like the more we talk, it's like, oh, I can just sort of feel that, that bigger picture thing. So I think for us today is simply just to say, okay, allowing and remembering being,
Mm-hmm.
being change, and being change mean change. Being change means being the full divine embodiment of who we are, and that's that fulfilling the potential of our embodiment is being that beacon, and to erase away the thoughts of what it's supposed to be or the expectations of what that's supposed to look like, to allow it to just simply exist on the individual and onto the collective level. And the collective says, are you crazy? We don't know how to do that as a collective.
Right. Right.
And it's like, well, yeah, because we created this entire set of dimensions on doing, right?
Right.
From the being.
Right. But it will just flow from the being.
Yeah. So, and that's the change. And that's how the change happens, free of cataclysms and, suffering and dramatic, painful, challenging change.
Right.
It can just simply be different in the next moment.
Right.
And that's from that wholeness too. So whatever there is for us to do that's our thing today. You ready?
I am so ready.
Nice.
Oh yeah, I was set to stay for quite a while.
What I was seeing, I don't know if I don't even know if I can encapsulate this. But all I can think of is the theory of relativity, right? And how this is just stuff that's been in my consciousness lately, and how we measure light through how fast it travels, and we measure time through the travel of light in many cases, right? So it was just interesting. Something I've been looking at lately is this whole theory on how if you have a moving object, light travels differently than if it's stationary, but then it's never really stationary because we're always moving because we're all energy, right? But then it was just like this whole thing of it's the same thing with consciousness. It was like what I got was basically equivalent to the same thing as consciousness is it's when we stop the doing that we see more clearly, right? That we can see the full picture more clearly because we're not moving, and the moving is not relative, like we're not doing and doing in the middle of doing, because then it's like a relative perception. But when you're just being the whole picture, and it was like the longer we were there, the deeper I went into this state of being and centeredness, that it was almost like I could see things just start to form like around me, like in these huge and yet minuscule like perceptions. And I was like, oh yeah, well that's why we get clarity on stuff when we meditate.
Right.
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 But it
Well,
was beautiful.
when
Yeah.
I first went out there, I heard the phrase human being, not human doing.
Right.
And I just kept focusing on that. And it just seemed to change my perception of who we are, because I feel like the doing is so ingrained in humanity. And that's not the natural state. And it's like backing out of that and into that place of, and I kept feeling, and I've never done this, so it's the sensory deprivation tank, and that I kept feeling that I was there, and it was like that felt like such a pure state of allowing
Yeah.
everything, and then that took me to the creative void, which then took me to infinite possibilities.
Yeah. Nice.
Yes.
Hmm. Well, everybody, let's hold on to that
Right.
and seeing how it's almost like we put the word human being in there because to remind ourselves, like it's like a hidden in plain sight kind of thing.
Right. Exactly.
Being, not doing.
Right. I'm a human doing.
Or I'm doing human, or I'm a human being. Which one?
Right.
Right.
Exactly. Yep.
Oh, we'll see how that sort of starts to flesh out for everybody this week.
Yeah.
Be observant to your own distractions,
Your
in the
own
doing,
doings.
your own doings, right?
Yep.
Where your mind is saying, oh, you got to do, you got to do, you got to do to be this, you got to do. And it's like, as soon as you hear that or see that or feel that notion of, I've got to do this to be this,
Right.
like to step back and say, no, wait. So let me remember how to be it
Right.
and then do from it in this case and see what that looks like instead. Just be observant to that, because I think that in itself will be a huge shift.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So thank you everybody for joining us. Have a great week. We'll see you next time. This is Angela Coulter and
Sarah Sieg Avagnoni.
signing off on this week's Ascended World. See ya.